The NBA lottery order is set. Let us ring in proper draft season with a quick mock draft of the lottery. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This is episode, I believe, number 226. Last episode was 225 with Esfania Barheni of The Athletic. We spoke about the NBA playoffs at the time, and sort of the players who had improved and who we expected to show further improvement in the playoffs. Esfania is one of the best people at charting player improvement throughout the league. So we talked about sort of playoff results we expected to see and improvements we expected to see. And he, at the time, nailed that the Pacers were going to advance over the Cleveland Cavaliers before that series even began. Shout out to S. But in between then and now, the lottery happened. I am very excited to sort of, having ingested the combine, to do a quick, well, by my standards, quick mock draft. And joining me for the second time is, you know him as the operator of the Hoop Intellect YouTube channel. He joined me after Summer League last year for a sort of debrief and breakdown on that, but he's coming in to do a mock. He just posted a mock draft yesterday that I think is up to like 34,000 views. So he's really doing me a solid. But Keandre, welcome back, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I appreciate you for having me back on the pod.
Yeah, you are always welcome, man. And congratulations on your mock draft video. It looks great. That is not a lotto mock draft. That is 60 deep. That is no joke. So uh why don't, just for the people who don't know you, I don't think there's gonna be many listening to this pod who don't. Uh where can they, what is your YouTube channel? What sort of content do you put out on a regular basis in addition to this mock?
Basically it's just channel where I got a lot of draft stuff going. Obviously the mock draft is one of the things that'll be on there. Big boards, which I'll be updating sometime in the next week and a half, something like that. Um, and yeah, just a lot of scouting reports on a lot of the most prominent players in each draft class, kind of going through things and a pretty tight format and talking about the strengths and improvement areas of everything and then projections and all that. So yeah, it's just a lot of good NBA draft stuff over there for the most part. And occasionally we'll do some stuff on rookies throughout the season. But this year I actually had it was just kind of hard to do. I didn't have enough time to get into the weeds like I wanted to with some of these players. But yeah, that's basically the gist of everything.
Yeah, it is really a must follow if you are into this stuff at all. And if somehow I have brought people to Keandre rather than the other way around, please enjoy his work. It is excellent. So this is going to be as concise as we can do it because I'm very considerate of my guest time. 1 through 14, not a full first round mock. We are just going throughout the lottery. And we haven't really compared boards or anything like that before now. Y'all can go through, of course, after this appetizer and have the full 5 course meal on Keandre's YouTube channel afterward. But Keandre, would you rather I Cooper Flagg would be our number one, either one of our number one pick. Would you rather discuss Cooper and you take 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., or would you rather take pick number 2 and go 2, 4, 6, 8?
I would rather I would rather take number two, just because I would like to I would like to know your thoughts on pick three with Philly. So I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
put the pressure on you and allow you to the honors to do that.
Thank you very much. I'm anything to make my guests more comfortable. I can see the light in your eyes. We're cooking now. Okay, so for the Dallas Mavericks, assuming some normalcy, which I'm only going to take it so far. They'll be taking Cooper Flag. I did 2 episodes really on Cooper this cycle, both with my ACC correspondent and Sherpa, Brian Geisinger, once early in the season, which was actually sort of at the, the relative kind of valley of Cooper's season, back when his scoring efficiency hadn't come up, and then ACC season kicked in, and he sort of was 2002 LeBron for a little while and put any
Yeah.
questions about his number one candidacy to rest. The second time I spoke about him was episode 224. That was just after the Final Four lost to Houston, and we talked about him then as well. So if y'all want to get my extended thoughts on Cooper, I would go to those two episodes. I'll restate just very briefly. I mean, I think people have sort of nitpicked a bit that Dallas is not a great situation for him because of this or that, and there's not a young core around him that he can run with. Despite how chaotic Dallas might seem now, and if I were a blue chip prospect, I wouldn't be thrilled to go to a place who just did Luka the way they did him. But regardless, the fact is, when you are a number one overall pick talent, and Cooper, I think, is not only the number one pick this year, but would be the number one pick in a number of years, not every year, but in a number of years. When you're that good, even with someone like Nico and all the firestorm of stuff he's going through, usually the number one pick, either intentionally or by circumstance, starts to mold the organization that drafts him more than the other way around. GMs cycle out, coaches cycle out, roster turns over because there's lots of roster churn every year in the NBA. Veterans get hurt. And the runway just sort of opens up for a player that good drafted that high. And so that's what I would expect to happen in Dallas. As for Cooper and his skill set and where I'm at with that, a wonderful player in a lot of respects. I said in that episode right after the Final Four that, in my opinion, the skill at which Cooper seems most in his element, most comfortable, most within sort of the natural flow of the game is with his passing, particularly his passing where he can make a decision within the first couple seconds of touching the ball. So though I think he gets some Tatum comparisons, I think he's sort of obviously a long way away. Tatum's in his prime, and obviously we
Right.
hope he gets better. But I think a long way away from operating a ton of pick and roll
Mhm.
successfully at the NBA level. I think he will, as soon as either Kyrie gets healthy or they get a more, maybe they can acquire a Kobe White or some sort of shot maker, fast paced point guard over the summer. But if he just gets someone to run with, I think you'll see Cooper as what some people call an amplifier of other talent early in his career, while providing all of the sort of backside help defense, rotational defense, relentless competitiveness, and just sort of two-way connector ability, but at sort of the highest possible floor. And I think it's going to be really good. I'm not going to make any predictions about the Mavs next year until we see what happens over the summer. But I really would not sweat the fit too much. That team will coalesce around Cooper before you know it. So I don't know if you have any other Cooper thoughts, but that's sort of what I think about him in Dallas.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be weird. Obviously, I wish Kyrie was healthy. I think that would
Yeah.
change things pretty drastically, at least in like the short term, because the
Mm-hmm.
combination of you got Kyrie and AD with a little more chemistry and time to gel and everything, and then you've got Cooper in the middle of that getting to kind of connect the dots, but also start to like ascend and show some of the growth that he has at least in the last 18 months or so as a shooter and shot creator and those types of things. But yeah, I think like obviously the Mavs were the most chaotic, at least one or two chaotic outcomes for the number one pick that were out there. I said in the video they don't necessarily deserve it from a front office perspective, given the entire Luka trade, but the fans do. So
Yes, they
I
do.
think, from that perspective, I kind of like it. So yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch once, AD and Kyrie kind of age out a little bit, what they do in that stage, especially with guys like, and like the short-term roster decisions they're going to have to make, maybe with uh, a Lively, a PJ Washington, some of those pieces who kind of they're pretty heavy in the front court right now. I'll be interested to see what direction they go in there, but yeah, that's kind of what I would be looking for. But yeah, I mean, number one pick is kind of just gonna, if they're smart about it, he's gonna dictate what else happens in the ethos. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the point about Lively, Gafford, I don't know if one of those guys probably is not going to stick around over the next, two full seasons there, just because it's what happens when you
Mhm.
acquire Anthony Davis. You got to disperse that talent to address other needs. But because the Mavs have been so public, one of the many things they've been interestingly public about is how much they want Anthony Davis to play with a center. I think one of the downstream effects on Cooper, now that this has fallen into their lap, is that look, he'll get to indulge in his passing because if they again don't have him operate from a standstill, but either play him in DHO or inverted pick and roll, or they set pin downs for him, wherever they start him and get him his touches, he should have plenty of lob opportunities, and he was no stranger to doing that with Maluach. But whether that's with AD at the 5 or AD at the 4 and Gafford and Lively at the 5, he'll get to do that, and he will be very good at that. It will, however, inhibit his actual driving game because by NBA standards, that space will be pretty cramped. But we're nitpicking. He'll have plenty of highlights. He'll
Yeah.
be he'll be very good.
Yeah.
All right, pick number 2, right down the road in Texas, down I-35, San Antonio Spurs. What do we got for Wemby?
Yeah, so the Spurs are in such an interesting spot. That kind of went underrated. I think that'd be the headline. Had almost anybody else got the number one pick, is like, okay, the
Mhm.
Spurs now have the opportunity to, do something pretty significant. And this is the what third time in how many years getting the top four pick? It's like three in a row, right?
3 in a row.
Um,
That's right.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I mean, you just made the De'Aaron Fox trade and everything, but I would still go with Dylan Harper here. For me personally, he is the clear number two on the board now. I think that there is room for criticism or hesitation, certainly in him as a prospect, just as an outside shooter and those types of things. But I think what he can do as a driver and somebody who puts pressure on a defense and creates advantages at the rate that he does, he's somebody who I just think that you kind of have to take, especially at his size. And I believe in the defense being a little bit more prominent than it was this year at Rutgers and kind of that situation and everything. So they're in again, a very interesting spot where you just traded for De'Aaron Fox. You have a guy like Stephon Castle there, who I would factor in just a little less than maybe the Spurs fans are to this point in terms of like long-term fit or anything like that. Because I prefer Harper as a player. But I think that you around somebody like Wemby, you want to get as many guys who earlier in his career you had almost nobody there who could put pressure on the defense himself, set him up in some sort of way. Now if you do have the issue of guys who can do that a little bit more, but maybe don't have the shot, I think that's a problem that you can kind of work with and figure out in that short term. Okay, this is what it looks like with them on the floor, and we can kind of move around that and move pieces. Or, the other option is, you didn't trade him for Giannis or something. But for now, I think Harper is the pick that's made the most sense to me, just from a best player available, talent standpoint.
Yeah, see, there's a bunch of conversations we could have about the Spurs, and we got to be as concise as we can, I guess. But it's almost an inversion of the Mavs sort of front court logjam because it's not necessarily a logjam between Fox and Harper. I'm not saying those guys can't play together down the road, but between Fox, Harper, Castle, and Vassell, it is unlikely that their best lineups, even in a year or two, would be those four plus
Hmm.
Wembanyama, because at some point you really would be giving up size. And as good a defender as Castle is, he certainly is not a wartless offensive player. Like, you do give something up on the perimeter with his shot, at least
Yeah.
at this point. So I think if just in the roster building question, out of those four, who do you think the Spurs, who would you regard as sort of the most expendable, and why?
I would say out of those four, the most expendable for me would be Vassell. I think that he's stagnated at least
Hmm.
slightly in the last year or so. I still buy him as a shot maker. I think he's going to be a valuable player in the league. Defensively, he hasn't quite taken the type of jump that I assumed. But just from like a hierarchy, I would put him there. But in terms of like fit for the team, and like if you're just making decisions based off of that, it would probably be Castle for me. I like him. I think that there's a lot of talk about him surrounding his rookie year and everything. I think we need to give just a little bit more time before we come to certain conclusions. But when you got a guy who isn't necessarily the best shooter or the most efficient without the ball. He's not high usage. We can talk about a number of different things with him, but in the context of that, he would probably be the odd man out. But yeah, I think it's one of those wait and see things because you trade. I think the Fox trade in itself would be like after getting the number two pick, we might look at it as, hey, maybe they shouldn't have done that so early. But because they didn't give up a ton to even get him, I think you're fine with that. But yeah, that would kind of be how I see it going forward. But yeah, I think a lot is gonna reside like on like how does Harper come in shooting the ball? How
Mhm.
does Castle look next year in year two shooting? Like there's a lot of things that I think still got to be considered before we kind of are able to see that fully.
Well, yeah. And are they going to, because Harrison Barnes still on their team, correct? So yeah, like, is Harrison still going to start? If Harrison starts, who comes off the bench, and who closes games? I mean, this is a team where Wemby is good enough to make them competitive, and he is competitive enough to want to compete. So assuming, hopefully, that he can put the blood clot issue behind him in time to be ready for the season, and that's a big question mark. But assuming he can, they have to deal with a real timeline issue. And to me, like, if you would have, I'll say this about Dylan, who is very, very good, but not a wartless player himself because his
Right.
shooting numbers are, nothing super impressive. His driving is outstanding, his handle's outstanding, his finishing's outstanding, and he projects to be a physically imposing guard. So there's a lot to love, but when since he is not sort of infallible, that there are obvious things about his game that are not going to translate immediately. I think that at the very least, if this if he ends up where, like, coveted by the Milwaukee Bucks for Giannis to the point where you're not giving up too much in addition to Dylan Harper to get Giannis, I would pull the trigger on that trade. I wouldn't really worry if you're worrying about Dylan Harper burning you down the line as like a potential Hall of Fame player. At that point, you would just, to me, I would just tip my cap and be like, good, like, Dylan, that's
Yeah.
amazing, good for you. I'll take Giannis on my team and see what we can figure out. But um, as for, I guess, I would agree with you that Vassell would be someone, especially because he has the salary to try to go acquire someone very, very good. Uh, I'd be I would not be too broken up about trading him, nor would I really be too broken up about trading Castle. But oddly, because Castle's defense was so translatable and good his rookie year,
Yeah.
and now you would theoretically have Harper and Fox. neither of whom are like outright bad defenders, but neither of whom also are tilted that way. Castle does become, I think, slightly more valuable within the Spurs' plans. I mean, at the end of the day, everything should still revolve around making Wembanyama's life easier. And even though each of these players have lots to recommend about them, the easiest way to make a star's life easier is with like shooting, passing, and defense. And Harper can become, I think, solid to very good in each of
Hmm.
those areas, but it would not happen next year, and you would get into some timeline murkiness. But it's a champagne problem. The Spurs, their focus is on getting Wembanyama healthy first and foremost, and so I think
Yeah.
that might buy them some time to help sort all of this out and see who really has chemistry with who. But, to that point, I think it is sort of a wake up call that maybe Fox's spot on the team, while it's probably safe for the next 12 months, after that, if it's him and Harper there, they might revisit that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else on San Antonio before we pivot to Philly?
No, not really. I think that was a good point that you made though. Like if over the course of the season, maybe Wemby does miss a little time at the beginning of the year, we get to see Fox and Harper out there. Harper maybe or Fox misses some time, Harper comes in and kind of takes over in a certain way in that similar type of vein. Then there are conversations to have because, Fox isn't super young. I mean, he's like 27 now. Like
Hmm.
he's about to hit his prime. Wemby's not, he's what, 21 at this point. So like there is a conversation to be had. While Fox obviously makes your team much better, depending on what Harper does do, it gets to you get to have some interesting conversations there. But you're in a good spot as long as Wemby is healthy and everything to kind of figure things out.
Yeah. Okay, so the main event here, you want to know what I do for Philly at number 3? By the way, we're not incorporating. I'm not saying with this pick I trade it for such and such. I'm not doing that. We are making a pick for each team with
Yeah,
each slot. So for Philadelphia, I'm taking Kon Knueppel number 3.
I like
And
it.
so again, that episode I referenced earlier, 224, that talked about Cooper, that was about Cooper, Khan, and Khaman Maluach. I have, when I really did my film dive, scouting Khan specifically, I was just like play after play. I was so impressed by all of the stuff that his fans are impressed by. How quick his decision making was, how quickly he could get his shot off, how he didn't need much space to get that shot off, how his driving, while not flashy, was extremely effective, and how the offense was just always in good hands when he touched the ball. And it doesn't hurt to shoot 91% on your free throws, 56% on your twos, and 40% on your threes on, 11 threes per 100. He is one of the most efficient freshmen in recent memory. Reed Shepherd had similarly gaudy efficiency stats last year, but Khan just played more in more big games, and Duke was a better team than that Kentucky team last year.
Hmm.
And he's a bigger player. He's 6'5" plus, and I would assume that you and I are both still quite high on Reed, despite
Yeah.
his sort of stop and start season in Houston. The reason why I would take Khan over Ace Bailey or over Tre Johnson, uh, which is not like I still like those players. I imagine both of
Right.
them are going to go in the next few picks here. But at a certain point, either I think that those guys or anyone else has the ability to be a top 2 starter in the league. Or if I don't, then I need to really start weighing their ability off the ball versus Khan's ability off the ball. And off
Hmm.
the ball, I really don't think it's close. Not like, and you never know. Ace was in a weird context at Rutgers, even though he played with Dylan Harper. Khan was certainly in a better context at Duke. But as we'll get into it when we get to Ace, but there is not only a bit of a skill question with Ace in terms of how good is he as a catch and shoot player versus as an ISO player. How good of a passer is he? I think Khan's clearly a better passer. But there's also a question of approach, not effort. I think they both are high effort players, but I think
Yeah.
Ace's approach is still that he expects to like work himself into becoming a star. And all stars need that mentality. I'm not judging him for having it. But if you're Philly and you have Embiid and you have Maxi and you have George, if you want to take seriously at all any prospect of making that era a success, and stranger things have happened. I mean, it would just take one healthy Embiid season and, they'd be in business again. Then you want to, again, in the same way you want to make Wembanyama's life as easy as possible, you want to make Embiid's life as easy as possible. And to me, adding, after Cooper probably, but adding the best off-ball player in the class makes his life plenty easy. And I know they have McCain, and that's great, but McCain and Maxey, frankly, is too small a backcourt anyway to take the Sixers to where they want to go. It's not like Khan is going to be some lockdown defender because he won't be, but I think he's probably bagged on a little bit too much on that end. I think he's got solid anticipation. He's very competitive. His
Yeah.
positioning is pretty good. There will be guys that cook him, but that happens to everyone in the league. They won't be a complete team if they were to draft Kon Knueppel, but they would be very, very, very difficult to guard. I mean, the amount he will have gravity right away. And for a team in the Embiid era that has somewhat struggled in big moments with sort of a stagnant offense, especially when Embiid has been an ISO heavy player, as good as he is at those isolations, you want to have not just any connecting piece, but a connecting piece that will sort of keep the ball popping, keep everyone in rhythm, and provide an independent scoring threat. And I keep calling Khan an off-ball player because that's where I think he will thrive the most, the quickest. But like I said, this kid is a very accurate, quick thinking passer. And when you open up an NBA floor to him, I think he's not Halliburton in terms of a lead guard, but like any really high field player like that, the NBA amplifies that skill as much as any other. If you have a good idea about where the ball should go and you can think quicker than a defense can react, it's gonna shine. And I think that he is at the very worst the second best shooter in the class because he can't access as many off the dribble shots and
Hmm.
angles as Tre Johnson can. But in terms of just accuracy and release, purity of form, he's really got it all. So I to me, that's my pick. And I think some people might think that that is a lower ceiling selection, but I frankly do not. There are not many recent analogs for Khan's efficiency at his size and his ability to do everything at a connector level, at least, already very well. Uh, Anyone who someone could name was either older or more incomplete a player than Khan is. So, I could go on, but I'm trying to be concise, but that would be why I would take Khan.
Yeah, I like it. I've kind of I've had Khan. I've grown fairly high on Khan. It's just been kind of trying to figure out between some of that perceived upside in terms of the shot making or being able to do certain things off the bounce and his decision making, his shooting. Obviously, he's not the greatest athlete, but
Mm-hmm.
on defense, he wasn't a cone. Like he competed very well. Like I said this in the scouting report, but if he was bleeding them all the time, you would have noticed with a bunch of help side blocks from Khaman or Cooper Flagg. Like that would have showed up eventually on those highlights. So I like it, especially for a situation like Philly, like you had mentioned, around Embiid, and I kind of think of him in a similar vein as like a McCain, um, as
Hmm.
kind of who he's become in terms of types of ceiling. I've heard Halliburton as another one, not necessarily the same type of player, but as how they were thought of as prospects. So, it's in terms of like a correction, he's definitely in that sort of range for me. But yeah, I like it.
So very diplomatic, very courteous as you always are. Why don't you let the people know who you had number three in your mock, now available on your channel?
Yeah, I had VJ Edgecombe
Hmm.
going number three.
So tell me why you would prefer, and would he be number four for you? This can serve as a transition. Would you take him number four for Charlotte?
Yeah, I would take
Uh,
him number four.
so
So I guess
contrast VJ with Khan, and then we can just move into VJ.
yeah. So I think for VJ, it's kind of a combination of tools mixed with feel, mixed with some of that downhill playmaking and those types
Hmm.
of things that I think that he has an advantage of, not just over Khan, but over an Ace Bailey or a Tre Johnson or really those are some of the main options, I guess, in that sort of range. I guess you could throw like a fears in there, but he's got his own questions. But some of that stuff, and also what I believe to be a capable off-ball game as a spot shooter. I think he's got enough of a volume and priors to be at least respectable in that aspect. And just kind of working off of that. For a situation like Philly, I think his spark plug off the bench or just being in that rotation as well, next to a Maxi or a McCain, both in the shorter and long term. I like what he would bring to that situation,
Hmm.
and it's really less about Khan and just more about what VJ brings to the table. And for a team like Charlotte, kind of getting into that, I really like it even more because of some of the flaws of the roster or the guys that they do have that I like in LaMelo and Brandon Miller. But his energy, the effort plays and the instincts on defense, and some of the connected passing and things of that nature, I think would work really well in that situation. And especially the type of athlete he is, he's got to be if not first in those sort of rankings, top two, I would say, in this class. Being able to run with the mellow in the full court would be
Hmm.
something I think that they would appreciate quite a bit. But yeah, he would be my pick here at number four. I like his fit in Charlotte quite a bit. I like. There's a couple players who I think would be ideal for them. It would have been Cooper Flagg. I kind of rooted for them to get the number one pick. Maybe not from like an organizational standpoint because things haven't seemed to work out for those guys for whatever reason. But from like a just on paper fit, you need guys who can do that from a Coop, VJ, and somebody like a CMB in
Hmm.
that sort of situation. So yeah, VJ would be my pick at number four.
Yeah, so I want to ask you VJ's projection as a ball handler and as like expanding his role. Because I think what you are saying you like about his fit, both in Philly and in Charlotte, would be as providing an element of
Yeah.
downhill, rim pressure, but also as a connector. Because I think one of VJ's most underrated qualities is how quickly he can see and execute connected passes. I think that's what Baylor did a good job weaponizing. I think they suppressed some of his skill set this year, but I think that aspect where they would run him off the ball on like a wide pin down or something, get him in the
Mhm.
middle of the floor. The big would sort of cheat towards him because he's such a crazy athlete, and he would hit Norchad Omir over the top or something like that. I think that sort of connective playmaking is something he's good at already, but to be really
Yeah.
bullish on him, like top 3 kind of bullish on him. I
Mm.
would think that you would project his game to go in like a more expansive direction. So where do you think he could ultimately end up like the longer he plays in the league?
Yeah, I think it's more of being able to do those things in the short term and being able to be on the floor and also have the opportunity to expand his game as a as more of like a secondary type. Um, Obviously, there's certain things within his handle, and as a pull-up jump shooter, like the comfortability there isn't quite where you would want it to be. But I think comparing and contrasting that with um, some of the elements of the other options in that spot, I would rather make the bet on someone who can do all those little things and make the connected passes and be able to make quicker decisions um, while being a plus on defense than somebody who maybe has a little bit more juice or is a little bit further along in terms of pull-ups or
Mm-hmm.
attracting defenses in that way or drawing two. Um, just because I think it's a little bit easier to bet on, and I guess it is safer by definition. So, and specifically for the Hornets, I think that is the direction that makes more sense for them. So I would say, just to that initial question, um, being able to get him in those situations where you can kind of simplify things and just allow him to grow and make mistakes, and especially a team that doesn't really have any expectations right now, that would be something that I think would be ideal. Philly specifically, I wasn't too much thinking about the long term of Embiid. I'm not sure where they go
Mm-hmm.
in the long term. Like, I couldn't necessarily make that decision based off of the health of Embiid or Paul George or those guys. I was kind of more thinking of like, if you've got Maxi or McCain or even both, how he complements them and is able to play that role. So that was kind of my thinking there.
No, I think it's like certainly very understandable. I think who knows what Philly, I mean, I'm sure Philly probably is going to want to look into trading that pick,
Mm,
but VJ makes sense there, certainly. With him, I think, look, Maxi's point guard in Philly, LaMelo's a point guard in Charlotte. There is a certain attraction, a theoretical attraction, in that VJ provides something that neither one of them provides consistently, which is, the athletic. I mean, and they're both athletic in their own way, but sort of that power kind of athleticism that you could project to be a difference maker defensively, since those guys are sopping up a lot of offensive usage and they have those sort of pull-up skills, pick and roll skills, high volume playmaking skills that VJ does not have. I'll say at this point, I'm a little bit concerned that his defensive value is not going to, I don't think it'll necessarily be bad, but I'm concerned that it's not going to ever be elite, just because even among guards, his athleticism is exceptional, but VJ is not the biggest guy. He's a little bit slighter. He measured a little shorter. I mean, people were like pleasantly surprised that he was 6'4" in socks at the combine, but
yeah.
wingspan's a little bit shorter.
Still
And
smaller. Yeah. Smaller. Yeah.
And that's like those sorts of things do tend to add up, in the NBA, especially if you play with a guard that's a little bit smaller, like Maxi, for example. So I wonder, as VJ's career unfolds, are his offensive contributions going to be more important, or are his defensive contributions going to be more important? That's sort of the question I keep
Mm,
running into with him. And the reason I prefer Khan to him at this point is that Khan does not have like very fancy guard skills, but he knows what he does and he still gets to his spots within the flow of an offense. And when he gets to those spots, I have a lot of confidence in him converting and continuing to bend a
yeah.
defense if he's not scoring. With VJ, I think it'll take a while. Um, he's got a little bit more pull up than what Baylor showed. You can go back and look at his Olympic tape. He showed a little bit more in that environment, but it's these hyper athletic, but slightly undersized guys. Donovan Mitchell is sort of the apex version of it in the league right now. He obviously has a crazy pull up game. Uh, Jaden Ivey, another recent example. You know, it can take some time, especially when you don't have that bag really polished coming in. And so it's like, is VJ kind of going to be neither fish or fowl? And in a situation like Charlotte, LaMelo, they've been bad enough for long enough that I'm sure they really want to circle the wagons, and LaMelo's going to want to like show real like he's going to want the team to really improve around him next year. They spent a top 2 pick on Brandon Miller 2 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
they've invested substantial draft capital. So uh I think that they can, run all day long and be very exciting with VJ on the floor. It's it will be, I think, an interesting barometer both of VJ and of LaMelo if he ends up going there, about how quickly VJ can acclimate when now he has more freedom and he's in an offense that can run and suit his strengths a little bit more. And it'll be a referendum on LaMelo about just how much better he can make a blue chip teammate.
Mhm.
I think with Miller, since there have been injuries and stuff, the jury's kind of out on that a little bit. But with VJ, I mean, that's really a sports car he'd have running with him. And for a guy who not holds the ball, but operates the ball as much as LaMelo does, like, he would have now two real, like, pretty much blue chip players with him long term. And I would want to, if I were a Hornets fan, I would want to see relatively immediate returns. Not necessarily a playoff appearance next year, but another one of these like low 20s win seasons. Even if VJ's far away, like, I think some interesting discussions could be had there pretty quick if
Yeah.
it's, yet another kind of year like that. But I don't mean to sort of drone on about VJ, but that's sort of my concern about him. It's that I think the offensive skill needs to show a leap for him to become what people want. And I think his defensive impact is really going to be tested in just sort of, I
Yeah.
mean, the NBA is just such a skilled league with so many oversized guys who can do so much. And that's going to be tough for him, at least early on.
Yeah. I think those are all valid points for sure.
Yeah. So Utah's number 5, I believe. I will take Tre Johnson for them. Uh, I've been a fan of Tre's for quite some time. There was a time where I considered Tre for as high as number 2. I don't honestly, I don't think it's crazy. It's not as though Dylan had, much more team success at Rutgers and Tre led the SEC in scoring, and it's not as though he was like inefficient in doing so, especially given his context. But as I consider Tre the sort of the best shot maker in the class in terms of the shots he can access off the dribble, uh, and I think his context was among the worst for all of these blue chip guys at Texas. I think he's very underrated as a competitor. I think he's underrated in terms of his frame because of the wingspan that he checked in with, which was 6'10 plus, as was Dylan's. But, you know, Tre is just freshly 19 years old. And if he grows into that frame, he may not have like elite level burst and twitch the way that someone like VJ does, but he has so much skill as a shooter, and he got a lot of reps with the ball in his hands. And I think his passing came along. I think his ability to draw fouls, especially with his length, operating with someone on his hip, I think all that came along. Utah is just in need, in my opinion, of like a real blue chip player. And I think Tre is. I
Yeah.
do not necessarily buy the low ceiling outcomes with him either. He may not be, 6'7", 6'8", but guys his size with that length who can shoot the way he does, you know, he can make all-star games down the line. He can play in very important playoff series with that shot making ability down the line. So he would be my pick for them.
Yeah, that was where I had him going in the mock too. And I
Mm,
think, even with some of the concerns with who he was defensively this year, some of the low stocks numbers that can be kind of scary or red flag sort of imposing or whatnot. Um, I think what he does bring as a shot maker and somebody who is, at least trending towards being more of a positive playmaker and somebody who can, run a second side pick and roll and, make a decision off of that or, make a play in transition. I think that he just makes a lot of sense. And yeah, like when Utah's in a spot where like they need somebody to hit, and
mhm.
I think that he has one of, well, depending on how different mocks shake out, but I think he has the best chance of that at this point. So I actually agree quite a bit with that pick.
Excellent. Thank you, man. Yeah. No need to belabor it. We like Trey a lot. I think his the low stocks numbers and stuff, I think as you shrink his offensive burden, which was substantial,
Yeah,
that'll come up a little bit.
yeah.
Plus,
I think yeah.
yeah, go
You made a
ahead.
good point. Just a quick aside, but like for him having that type of length, I think that is positive. For that at least not being as drastically bad.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I think Utah probably has their eye on picking high again next year with some of the guys and some of the ties they have to some of the guys at the top of the draft next year. And I think Trey, won't imperil that. Like I think it's still he's going to be a guard adjusting to NBA life, and it's hard for guards to adjust to NBA life. So I think you can get him in the door with the eye on maybe one more high draft pick, and then they're on their way. But yeah, let's go to Washington. Not maybe a thrilled organization with the lottery, but yeah.
yeah. So this is a pretty tough spot here, um, for Washington. Well, I mean, they have the freedom to do pretty much anything, but just with the options that are at hand, I think that I'm gonna go with Ace Bailey.
Hmm.
He's been one of the tougher guys for me to sort of place within this class. As I really like the shot making at his size. Obviously a lot of debate on where he measured in at, but 6'8", 6'9", somewhere in that vicinity with shoes on. But his ability to get the shots, get the spots on the floor, in the mid range, he was lights out. Um, I buy some of his defensive potential becoming a little bit more of a featured part of his game,
I
at
agree.
least in the long term, or you did just in an NBA context. I made this point before. Um, I can't remember where I made it. Maybe it was in his video too, but just he hasn't played for a Montverde or for a Sunrise or somebody like that. He's playing public high school basketball in Georgia. He didn't play for these affiliated shoe teams, and Rutgers didn't have a very good context like a Duke or a Florida or somebody like that, or even like a Tennessee or something. So I think that there's a little bit more room for growth for him in that aspect of just having the discipline and being able to fully utilize those tools in the future. So I think, to keep it more simple, just like a guy with his size who can make shots at that level, and has the potential on defense, I think you can kind of mold him and figure out some of the things around the edges. Now, it is going to take a little bit of a mentality shift, and I think this is part of the reason that he's been kind of a hard guy to project, and I can think you can kind of see that through some of his interviews lately, or at least at the combine and everything. It's like you kind of mentioned earlier, he he is a star mentally and in his
Hmm.
play, right? I think he is one of those guys who, as much as he does project well as an off-ball player or somebody that can cut and move and play well off of that, attack a closeout, he is also rhythm based in some ways. Like he kind of needs ISO, to get the feel
Hmm.
of the game. Or I don't think he's completely like Jabari Smith, but similarly in that sort of way, I think that they could be, um, similar. But yeah, I think for Washington, you get a guy like him in there as you're kind of rebuilding. You got Bilal, you got Alex Sarr. You definitely want a top three pick next year. And I think that his upside is something that you can build with. You get a Cam Boozer in there. You get a AJ DeBansa, Darren Peterson. You're moving in a direction that I think makes sense, and it would actually help him even more, and sort of find his bearings. So at this point in the draft, with no con, I kind of like Sarr as the centerpiece there, as in the front court, and so I wouldn't
Mhm.
really consider Khaman as much, but yeah, that's who I would go with.
Yeah, I like that pick. I think if you had gone in another direction, I would have really been intrigued with him in New Orleans with the next pick. But I think, look, I like a lot about Ace's game, and it is easy to forget how young he is. I think he turns 19 in August. So that'll be after Summer League is done. He's among, it's easy to forget because Cooper's even younger than he is, but he's among the youngest prospects in the class. And for a kid that young, I think there's a real split on Ace by people. There's some people who focus only on what he can do. And that's where you see the shot making
Hmm.
and the Kevin Durant comparison, which I don't think does anybody any good. But like they just see what they perceive as like tough shot taker, tough shot maker. That means he has star qualities. Then there's a group of people who really only focus on what he cannot do. And that's where, it's how easily does he create separation? How many easy shots does he create for himself currently? His approach to really wanting to encourage that ISO, which slows the game down and allows defenses to reset. I think that even though I said before, he doesn't lack for effort. I think his approach hurt Rutgers this year. I think there are times where he was a very good player and an additive player to winning for them, but other times he
Hmm.
was not. And I think, his passing is sort of an outgrowth of that. There's a lot to be desired there. But a lot of people focus only on those deficiencies. And that can happen with any player, especially with social media and the climate being what it is. I just think it's particularly pronounced with Ace for I think the height of his highs and the depths of his lows. But at the end of the day, uh, for someone who 4% block rate, I think defended hard, even though he's got a lot to clean up, but any 18-year-old has a lot to clean up on defense. Like he's going to be someone who can take and make shots from three. Even, I mean, these 3-point numbers were okay, but they'll get better in the NBA as he puts on strength, his core gets
Yeah.
stronger, etc. And someone who'll be able to provide some weak side rim protection and defend the 3-point line and X out. And if you can do that, then you're clearly an NBA player, and your individual skill beyond that will determine how, the heights that you reach. And I think that Ace has a real path to becoming a very, very, very good player. Uh the deficiency in his playmaking is something that I don't know if there's a player who's a star level player in the NBA now who started from as low a playmaking and feel point that Ace is starting from, which is
Yeah.
probably why I like did not take him third to Philadelphia, for example. I think those star outcomes are a bit beyond him, but I think he can be sort of more than the Michael Porter Jr. comparison suggests as well. I think a more successful defender, and MPJ's worked himself into a decent enough defender for his role, but I think Ace could be a more successful defender. I think he could be a very, very good shooter. He's just gonna depend a bit on who the lead initiator on his team is. And that's gonna be someone who's gonna have to arrive in
Yeah.
Washington next year, because I don't think that guy's on his team right now. But they definitely need someone who can take and make shots. Even though I like a lot of their young guys, Washington's like their just efficiency of putting the ball in the hoop was really lacking. But uh Bub, I really like. Keyshawn George, I like and thought was turned out to be a real steal in the 20s. So they've got some guys to help facilitate for Ace. And I think it'd be a
Mhm.
perfectly fine selection. So no beef with it at all. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
got
for
anything to
sure.
add or
No, not really on that. I think you
okay.
covered it.
Yeah, so for the Pels at 7, again, different directions they can go. Um, hmm. Depends on what they really want to do with Zion. Uh, I am going to. hmm,
This is
I'll
a
take
tough one.
Maluach for them. It's tough. I will take Maluach kind of reluctantly because I kind of like Derek Queen more in a vacuum than come on. There are some other guys that I can prefer to come on as well. Again, it's more in that previous episode with Brian, 224, but I think Kaman's defense is, while like I can see the vision a little bit, I think right now, presently, he would be a liability defensively in the NBA with the quality of guard play and drivers and strength
Hmm.
that there is. So I think that would be kind of a rude awakening. However, I am pretty optimistic on that jumper. And I'm very optimistic as a lob threat and a lob finisher. So that at 7-2, as long as you have the work ethic, which he's got, he'll get better on defense. And though
Yeah.
I don't think he'll ever be an all defense level player, I think he can be good. And if you are there's just no replicating how valuable that can really be if he is the shooter that
Yeah.
I think he can be. So, uh, though I think there's other intriguing options, I think, he will be a player that is very coveted around the league if he goes to where I think he has a chance to go. I'm maybe not, maybe he only has I don't know, pick a number out of thin air. 35 to 40% chance of becoming like a highish volume 3-point shooter. But that is enough of a chance to swing on in this part of the draft. And I think he's someone that coaching staffs are going to continually want to work with because they'll just keep seeing this talent and he'll keep finding opportunities for himself throughout his rookie deal. So uh he would theoretically fit on any team, like literally any team, and especially on New Orleans. So just given what they need in the middle and they're sort of having to try to make things as easy for Zion, giving Zion as much space as possible. So I will go come on for them.
Yeah, I like that pick there. I think the thing with him is more of like a if it does work out, and that's how you kind of got to approach it with all these players. But if his best case is the guy that they've been coveting next to Zion in the middle, if he, like you said, if he is somebody that you want to continue um, building around in a significant way, I think um, that is a good point on his defense. I think that it is going to be more of a process. I actually like what he did as a play finisher and around the rim a little more than like just pure shot blocking and rim protection. I think he's made such impressive strides defensively from who he was before that
Hmm.
I still look at it in a positive lens, but it will take a second for him to kind of adjust to the speed of the game, being in certain spots in the pick and roll, being able to cover ground and all those types. Once things start get to moving at an NBA level, I think that that's going to be you're going to want to look at who he is in game 60 rather than game 6 is what I would
Right.
say on that.
Right.
But yeah, I think especially next to guys like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, and if you can have
Mhm.
them for more of an extended period, that could that combined with what we all know Zion can do when he's healthy, that could be pretty prominent. So I like that.
I also, just because you mentioned Herb, I don't want to go too far into intangible land, but everything I've heard about Kaman is that he's like a really good kid, like an
Yeah.
earnest kid who wants to get better. But when I watch him play, you don't necessarily see the mean streak. You see him play hard, but there's a difference between playing hard and having sort of like a real mean streak. And I think that he's a guy who might early in his career maybe take on the personality of the team around him a little bit. And I like pairing him with Herb Jones in that respect. I think, Herb always seems like he
Yeah.
wants to take everybody under his wing, whether it's a rookie or like a 10-year vet. I would like to see that pairing and see how one rubs off on the other. Because Brian said that Khaman is an excellent communicator, which is always a very good sign out
Hmm.
of your big. And I think that union particularly could be a fruitful one. And everyone knows how I feel about Trey Murphy. You don't need to go down that road. But yeah, I think it could be potentially
Yeah.
very good in New Orleans.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we got number 8. Is that Brooklyn?
That's Brooklyn.
That's Brooklyn, right?
That's Brooklyn.
Okay. Um, Another tough spot here in this part of the lottery. I think I'm gonna go with I think I'm gonna go with Derek Queen here at number 8.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been pretty impressed, and especially into after doing deep dive and creating his video. I've been really impressed with his um, abilities as a creator and as a driver. I think that's among some of the best in the class. Obviously, he didn't it didn't show up statistically in the same way in terms of his passing and playmaking overall, but I have a very high confidence in that being more of a part of his game in the NBA. And I think a spot like Brooklyn specifically would get a lot out of him in terms of running DHOs and getting creative with how you can use him as a hub. Um, and obviously there are some big questions in him defensively, in whether he is a 4 or 5. Can he move around well enough? Which I had quite a bit of confidence in after watching him even more too, as opposed to like him being a drop big or like your traditional rim protector. But I think that there are, especially on this roster, I think that there are ways to insulate him in a certain way, and focusing on what he does do well. I like what he could bring to the table in this spot for Brooklyn. Obviously the shot is gonna have is gonna change like who he is as a player quite a bit. If you can get it there, I think that I'm pretty I'm pretty I wouldn't say high on his shot, but I do think that there is at least more of a chance than like the statistical evidence or
Mm-hmm.
um, like traditionally. Like solid free throw shooter, really good touch around the rim.
Excellent
Um,
touch. Yeah.
Not terrible mechanically or anything like that. So and he had a few games where he did it. Like Purdue and um, Florida, I
Florida,
believe.
yeah.
Yeah,
Colorado State, yeah, sure. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think that he makes a lot of sense for what they're going for, and especially a team that doesn't have much of a fulcrum or anything right now to like build around or even have an idea of. I think he would be a great selection.
Yeah, I'm gonna have an episode coming out on some of the bigs because this class really does have a bunch of bigs, very
It does.
intriguing bigs. Hopefully, best case scenario next week, but we'll see. But the thing about Derik, there's that question about is he a 4, is he a 5, all this stuff. You know, on the one hand, that low 3-point volume kind of makes me think he's going to be a 5 early in his career because there's just not many 4s that don't shoot threes unless you're like
Mhm.
Giannis. And Derek's a lot of things, but Giannis, he is not. However, what and even though I think a lot of these oversized guys who have some guard skills, they're always most actualized at the 5 because that gives them the most space. It gives them the most mismatches because they're matched up against other 5s. That might change as sort of the NBA starts to be full of these kinds of players. But at the end of the day, you are what you play like. And he played alongside Julian Reese all year, and Julian's a good player in his own right, but initially I was like, man, this is they got to put Derik at 5 and spread it out around him, and that's really where you're going to get to see the full bag, the full breadth of his passing talent. Uh, but the more I watched him, I really don't think he's interested in being a 5 defensively, because what he's good at defensively, which is like, I think he embraces switches because I think he has a lot of confidence in his hand placement. Now, that can get reachy and you can get fouls that way, but sort of like Ace's approach about becoming a star offensively, Derik thinks Derik thinks very highly of his own skill set. You can watch when he plays. He has a degree of confidence on both ends where he thinks that he's quicker than you, he thinks that he is smarter than you, and he thinks that he's just more skilled around the ball than you are on offense and defense. And the thing about Derik is that he inconveniently is right most of the time about that. You know, you kind of wish that he sometimes maybe carried himself with a bit more I don't know if humility is the right word, but he's just an audacious player. And at the end of the day, as a shot maker at his size, he's extremely unique. As a passer, he's extremely unique. As a defender, he holds up pretty well on drives. He really likes when
Yeah.
people try to drive on him because he's like, you dummy, watch what I can do if you expose the ball to me. And I think he needs to get in better shape, and that's fine. The NBA will force that out of him if he wants to go where he wants to go. And so I think it's a great pick. You know, there's a real case to be made that among guys who are going to play, you know, over 6'9" in shoes, he's the second most talented in the draft. And his ball skills, frankly, might be ahead of Cooper's at this point in the draft. You know, he's got a lot of skill. And I think whoever gets him should be very pleased. It'll be a bit of a wild ride at times, but that
Mhm.
buzzer beater against Colorado State was not really an accident. As a shot maker, he is really good. And under no circumstance should I think he fall out of the top 10 at all.
Yeah, I think that another thing I would add to that is, we always spend a lot of time trying to figure out, is he a 4, is he a 5, and all that. For someone that brings what he brings in terms of offensive talent and upside, I think just kind of figuring it out is
Hmm.
what you're supposed to do. And you just try different things, If you do still have Claxton there, what does that look like? Playing different guys at the 4 next to him and just kind of feeling those things out and trying to see, you know, how does that look for those minutes? But yeah, I agree with you on all that, especially defensively. Like you would think that he's just getting blown by a lot. Just you might watch 10 minutes here or there at certain points of the season, and there were some effort stuff and motor stuff that he needs to
Hmm.
bring more full time. But when that was there, and he is on an island or he is in a big game, and has to get this stop, like he got it most of the time, and I don't think people would necessarily expect that for somebody who is built the way he is currently or anything like that. I think his feet are pretty underrated, especially like the he didn't test out that great in terms of like
No,
anthro and all that like agility stuff. But I watched the
no.
you watch the game and it's like, well, I mean, you know, they couldn't go anywhere against him. So,
This is
um,
what I mean. Like when you want him to approach the combine, be like, I'm gonna prove everybody wrong. I'm gonna be in the best shape of my life. But I think he's just sort of like, who cares about the combine? You see my tape? I'm the man. I just
yeah,
it endeared me to him. Derek's like, I can't stay mad at you, Derik. I really can't. Like I get it. I love Derik coming into the season, and I still think he's just a fascinating player. And there's a lot of arguments for taking him higher than this. You know, Kon, Tre,
yeah,
VJ, Ace. You know, if you ask Derik, he'd be like, I'm a better guard than all those guys, and I'm bigger than all of them. So, you know, why don't you take me?
yeah.
And there's worse arguments. So
There's an
I,
argument. Yeah.
yeah. So that'd be thrilling for Brooklyn, and I would encourage any Brooklyn fans to get out and see him if he falls that far. I have a feeling he won't, but if he does, like, man, that'll be fun. All right.
Yeah.
Let's recap the lotto. We're a little over halfway. We got Dallas, Cooper Flagg, San Antonio, Dylan Harper, Philadelphia, Kon Knueppel, Charlotte, VJ Edgecombe, Utah, Tre Johnson, Washington, Ace Bailey, New Orleans, Khaman Maluach, Brooklyn, Derik Queen. Now, I don't know about you and your board, Keandre, but
Mhm.
that top eight to me, again, some arguments here and there for some people to slip, but that top eight feels very projectable in terms of, in some order, we could see those eight players in, draft night going in that order. So I'm gonna take this opportunity, considering we're whatever we are, 100 minutes into this podcast, even though I might have some new listeners with you on my channel. I'm gonna get weird, okay? This is for the Toronto Raptors, and when I say weird, I mean weird. So this is Toronto Raptors at pick 9. Like I said, the great Esfani Baraheni was my last guess. We talked, and this was pre-lotto. We talked about the Toronto Raptors, who S does a great job covering, has covered them for years. And we spoke about VJ at the time, hoping maybe the Raptors would have a better pick. We also spoke about bigs because that's sort of another position group that I think their fans are very interested in addressing. And we talked about Derik Queen and Khaman, chiefly, but unfortunately, those two just fall off the board right before them. So I'm going to take this opportunity to select and start a conversation about Hansen Yang. So,
Mm.
so
Wow.
here's,
That was not expecting. That was the weird that we were going. I love it.
yeah,
Let's
so
give. I need some
Hansen,
popcorn in here.
Hansen played in the Chinese Basketball Association the last couple of years. Came to the combine, scrimmaged at the combine, 7'1" barefoot, and about 250 pounds. Now, I think before the combine, he was in better shape this season, but the question was sort of a familiar question about a certain brand of big, which is he really going to protect the rim? Are his feet too slow? Is the speed of the game and the strength of the game really going to be too much for him? And I'm not going to say that he answered all those questions in one combine scrimmage, although I thought he looked very good. I thought his movement skills looked better than expected. His best skill to me is his vision and his passing and his just sort of ability to operate possessions. But I think he has good touch. Shot 33% on threes this year. Not a ton of volume, but enough to where I think he's going to want to make it a part of his game. And I think right now there's some buzz around him to be like, maybe this guy can sneak into the first round.
Yeah.
Maybe. Uh, what I'll say is, I had quote tweeting a highlight of his today where I said, there's a real possibility to me that he is the best passer in the draft. And that's not necessarily making the flashiest passes in the world or the quickest passes in the world, but there are, and I'm not going to invoke any names to get really wild, but there are just certain players who have such an understanding and such a feel for a possession and for their teammates that the passes they choose to make or not to make, and is just like that calibration is just at a higher level. And I think Hansen has that. I think he is the kind of player who you could see it in the scrimmage, you could see glimmers, and it will happen on his NBA team as well. Guys are just going to enjoy playing with him on offense, a guy who can pass this well. And this was just an oversight on my part because for a while, I know his measurements had been taken at international competitions and stuff, and like that 7'1" number had been out there, but for whatever reason, it just hadn't registered with me until that number came through at the
Mhm.
combine. 7'1" barefoot means that he's 7'2" in shoes with this kind of vision. 7'3" and a quarter wingspan with pretty decent mobility. I, you know, the Raptors have Jakob Poeltl, who's like a very good DHO operator, a good decision maker, good passer in his own right, but in my opinion, does not have the touch that Hansen has. And Jakob's like 6'10, 6'11, 7'1 wingspan, like kind of low key a bit undersized at center. If you're looking for an environment for him, you'd want shooting. Toronto doesn't have a ton of shooting, but they got Grady Dick, they've got Oshai, they've got Quickly, they've got Jacoby Walter. They have some bets in that area. You'd want enough athleticism to where if he's playing a lot in drop, you got weak side protectors. And that's when someone like Scotty Barnes sort of enters this conversation. I don't know what that pairing would look like long term, but man, is it invigorating me this evening just thinking about. I think that good passers want to play with good passers. I think there's some angst over how much usage as a number one option Scotty should really be having for a team that has high aspirations. And I wouldn't mind weaponizing Scotty's ability as a cutter and as a connective passer where he doesn't have to create so much from himself for himself all of the time. There's a lot that I like. There's a lot and I haven't even like finished my film review of Hansen. So this is with a grain of salt, but legitimate feel, legitimate passing and touch at 7'1", 7'2" in shoes. It's hard to find. It is hard to find. And so that would be my pick for Toronto as like a big home run swing at this point in the draft.
Yeah, like I said before, I definitely wasn't thinking that that was the direction that you were gonna go in. But I will say, after watching the combine, the biggest thing I wanted to see from him is just being in that environment with other like good college level bigs, seeing what he looks like when he does have to move around a little bit or recover for a weak side help or a weak side block or things of that nature. Just move around. And I thought he did pretty well. And then obviously you've got the moments where he did make those passes and, he was confident as a shooter. He took several attempts over those 2 days. I think the skill set is there. And, I put him on the mock as a draftable guy. I've been kind of hesitant of watching him over the course of the season just because, I tapped in early. It's a CBA. It's a lot going on. Very interesting league to watch, like a lot of. No disrespect to them. It's just different. But I will say like the skill set has always popped. It's just a little interesting when Jared Sullinger is the guy that he's going up against, or just really interesting time. I actually encourage everybody to at least watch one full game. You'll feel different afterwards. Um, but uh,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, like I really think that he's gonna rise. Like whatever we would view as his stock at the moment, I think is going to continue to go up. Nine, I'm not sure it will get that high, but
Mm.
maybe it should. So I like that, and I like that we're getting interesting because it makes it more fun for these last couple picks at least.
Well, thank you. Again, I expected courtesy, diplomacy from you. Uh, would you, where like I'm glad that you were pleasantly surprised with the movement skills. Offensively, like let's say he's a drop big, but like a serviceable drop big on defense. How much usage, not like in terms of a number, but do you think that a team could like run through him for like stretches of a game in the NBA offensively and be in good hands? Do you trust his decision making and his touch and his shooting ability that much?
Yeah, I think I'm still questionable on how much of that he would deserve in like a winning situation, right? Like at least somewhat
Hmm.
positive. Um, but I think the skill set is there enough. And also, I think if you are drafting him, obviously 9, you're doing that full time, but or in a higher volume way. But wherever you're drafting him, that is one of the primary draws to him as a player. So I think like even if he is like sort of a backup, and more of like a, I'm trying to think of somebody who is remotely similar in the league. Obviously not at that size, but if he is even, more of a backup, I think that he has the capabilities to be able to do that in that capacity. That would be kind of the median that well, maybe not median, but like for him to, let's say that he is a player, like he's in somewhat of a rotation,
Mhm.
being able to do that in that capacity. Maybe not like a fulcrum of an offense or a hub, but something like that.
Well, I mentioned when I started talking about him, it's a criticism you often hear about bigs, but it's a criticism that a lot of people, myself included, had about Alperen Şengün, and he'd go
Mhm.
higher than ninth if you redrafted that 2021 class. Not comparing, the Turkish league to CBA, so to speak, but it's criticism about the ninth overall pick last year, Zach Edey, who is someone I was like as high as you can be in that draft, and I think Zach acquitted himself very, very well, both at the combine and in the NBA last year. Different
Mhm.
player than Hansen, different strengths, but oversized, lots of touch. Hansen has, I think, excellent footwork, probably more advanced footwork in the post, and a
Yeah.
bit more twitch to him maybe than Zach did. But uh, yeah, I'm excited to watch more of him. I've caught the bug, so to speak. Uh, but here, pick number 10 is the Houston Rockets, who have this pick from the Phoenix Suns. That's you, my man.
Yeah, so I've been trying to anticipate and think about this pick a little bit. This was actually a difficult one on my mock as well, because Houston is in such an interesting spot. There's not like you're probably not finding somebody at 10 who's going to completely like usurp some of the young guys they already have on the
Hmm.
roster. Like you got Cam Whitmore, you got Reece Shepard, didn't play at all. Um, but because of that, I think I'm gonna just go with best player available to me, and that is Colin Murray-Boyles. Um,
Hmm.
I obviously he has some flaws that people like to focus on a lot, in terms of the shooting, which I'll save that for later. But what he's able to do defensively, is as good as pretty much anyone in this class. I think you could have an argument for him versus Flagg. I think that is that good, or somebody else if you put them in that mix. You look at that, and some of the physicality that he brings to the table offensively and being able to convert at a high rate, the type of improvement he had as a driver this year and self creator, especially in that context. That's probably the worst one of the guys who I think can go in the lottery. Um,
The
with that
context you
South
mean.
Carolina,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
of those players. But you look at that, you look at the feel and how I think that he could be used at the next level in terms of short rolls and maybe you go split or just things of that nature, and even just making the extra pass and doing step ups and DHOs and those types of things because he is a big body. You can open up advantages there. I think that he's somebody who can do a number of things, and even if it isn't Houston, that is like the perfect spot for that to happen. Obviously, you've got questions with you got Tari Jabari, you've got Shingun there. Who knows what this roster even looks like next year after kind of
Hmm.
getting a
Hmm.
taste of what playoff basketball is and the ceiling of their team could be. But you know, you just get to a certain point where it's like you can't, for me, and this is, some other people might have somebody higher, but you can't really think too much about fit in the situation and pass up the opportunity of getting somebody who has the type of skill set that he has, and I think it's super valuable. And I think that he could still play here. It's not like he's just gonna um, do nothing because the shot isn't there right now. Like I think that he's good enough as those other things to find and become a contributor. So that would be the pick for me here.
Yeah, I think a very good pick. I like CMB a lot. He's someone who he keeps rattling around in my head for the fit questions that you've brought up, because those are going to exist not only in Houston, where
Yeah.
there's a particular glut of players, but like Amen Thompson in offensively uh has some overlapping strengths, although like an extremely unique player, and Collin's an extremely unique player. But it I'd be interested to see how those two would play together. But on any team, you know, it's going to be hard to play Collin next to a nominal non-shooter. You know, he would have to kind of have shooting all around him in the lineup at least early. But
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about defensively, because you said you thought he was potentially right there with Flagg. So what are, he said at the combine that he like embraces this like a scheme that switches a lot. And I actually don't think that South Carolina embraced switching enough in his case. And he played next to another big in Nick Pringle. But what do you think he does best defensively? And is there any scheme that you think would particularly challenge him defensively? Or do you think he would thrive, no matter what is asked of him?
Yeah, I think that he's one of those guys who has all the tools. I think if you're the thing with him would be just like obviously he doesn't have the dimensions or vertical ability to like be a drop five or be somebody that you're like
Hmm.
completely confident in as a rim protector. We'd also say that about. I mean, I hate making the reference to Draymond because he's one of one. I think that comparison is a little bit unfair to CMB. Just like that's such an insane standard and a unique set of circumstances that made Draymond who he is.
Hmm.
But I would say like we wouldn't say that about Draymond, and he has become that, and he has done that in his career at least for short stretches or when it counts. But from the switching, from the ability to get out and hard edge, like he was doing that as well as anybody that I've really seen. Somebody his size and stature, or being able to play to the level, late switch, those types of things. Like I think he's got a lot of it, and obviously he's not full. He doesn't have like wing skills in terms of screen navigation yet, or he hasn't had those types of reps on the perimeter, but I think that he moves well enough and is physical enough to get there. So yeah, I think that there's just so much that he's able to do. I think his number one strength is just being able to read the floor and be instinctive, like be in the right spots, make plays, and then having the footwork and the physicality to hang with a number of NBA level players. And I think
Hmm.
as he continues to shed a couple pounds and become a more ready-made NBA athlete, I think he's only gonna, continue to grow there too. So I think that he's just got all the tools there, and it'd be just hard to pass up on.
He's another guy where there's I think, a disparity between focusing on what he can do versus what he struggles
Yeah.
with. And his strengths are very, very special. I'll reserve my thoughts on him more for the episode, because I would cover him with Derik and some other guys. But
Hmm.
you know, in NBA space, if he is driving to the hoop, whether that's attacking the closeout or it's he gets a pick set for him or whatever, he's gonna finish. His touch around the rim and his strength and his ability to just clear space and have guys bounce off of him is very, very impressive. So I the amount of athleticism that the Rockets would have, which is already, top of the league if they added Murray-Boyles, would be something wild. But I think a very good pick. And absolutely like a lotto pick, no question. Has an argument to go, higher than where we took him. But
Yeah.
okay, so that moves me to number 11, the Portland Trailblazers. Another very interesting team that kind of has lots of reps accounted for across their roster. I think they were a pleasant surprise just in terms of quality of play in the second half of the season, but they can, I don't want to say afford to be choosy, but like they've got Scoot and Shaden at guard, and they're not done with those two by any means. They'll probably, I think, trade Anthony Simons this summer, or at least look into doing that. They have Denny and Tumani Kamara on the wings. Jeremy Grant's still there, and they've got Klingon at center. So everyone likes to say best player available no matter what, but like you said with the Rockets, you really can afford to just take best player available, which is kind of uncertain at this point in the draft. I will say that
Yeah.
I'll take, again, for the sake of discussing him, this is a guy who has a decent amount of buzz, but I'll take Carter Bryant for them at this spot. Not completely confident in it, but at a certain point, with Scoot there and with Klingon there and with Denny there, even though Denny had a career year last year, like you are going to want shooting on the floor. Like it's never really going to hurt to take what I believe is a clear NBA level athlete in Carter who can shoot. And I believe Carter can shoot. I think he was around 36% on maybe 9 threes per
Get the
100 for
business narrative.
Arizona.
My
But
fault. I've been having some technical issues the last couple of seconds. I don't know if you can notice,
nah,
but
that's all right. That's all right.
yeah.
But Carter, had a really good combine week, I think, and he had his moments for Arizona certainly, but between Caleb Love and KJ Lewis and some of the other guys on that team, they just didn't run a lot for him. But I think what he did hard, which was defend an ISO very hard. I think for a wing-sized guy, and he's probably in shoes, between 6'7" and 6'8", nearly a 7-foot wingspan. I think he showed some ability to pursue over screens, even if his navigation isn't, top shelf yet, but had good recovery tools, quick off the ground. And I think there is more to his three-point shooting than meets the eye. He can cut and dunk. He finished well around the rim on a heavily assisted diet. But as a shooter, I saw him set sort of Spain screens and pop out and let threes go, and it looked good. I think that volume can get higher. And that's sort of where I think the upside is with him. Not necessarily projecting a ton off the dribble, but for an athletic guy with his dimensions, you can see off the dribble gains that will surprise you a little bit. And Tommy Lloyd in the past has emphasized for his wing players who are not his main guards, making quick sort of connector decisions before. That's sort of, he did that for, Ben Mathurin when he was there. And Brian is like a bigger, better athlete than Mathurin, in my opinion, even though Mathurin's good. So I think there just might be more there. If you're going to take an upside bet on a wing who I think can get on the floor and stay on the floor because of his shooting and because of his defensive activity, he showed some decent vision here and there when it was called upon. I just think there's a lot more to uncover. And there are other guys, there's, Noah Essengue, there's other sort of wings to make bets on, but I think Carter is the best intersection of youth, physicality, just all around athleticism and shooting talent. So I would take him for Portland. I would take him basically for any team here. His package is similarly appealing just about to anyone in the league. So I'd take him.
Yeah, he's one of those interesting players because the entire year, like from start to finish, I was wondering why he wasn't getting as many minutes,
Yeah.
because every time he stepped on the floor, he's making a positive impact, and obviously, no disrespect to like Trey Townsend or anything, like really solid college player, had a tremendous career, got to move up to in Arizona, but there was a certain point where what Carter brought defensively, being able to guard in multiple spots and knock down shots a little bit more consistently, that they really needed, especially like with how that roster looked, and you had those three guards, and really had like Del Orso, who was like a top flight shooter there. But yeah, I think like just in terms of prototype, he just makes a ton of sense in a lot of spots. I guess it would depend on how things shook out, but I've grown to be like, high enough on him as like once that late lottery starts to roll around, one of those picks from like 11 to 14, maybe 16 at the lowest is where I would probably pin him in. I just think that he checks too many boxes at that point.
Yep. I agree. I agree. All right, you are up at 12 for the Chicago Bulls.
Chicago Bulls. This is another really interesting spot. Um, the Bulls. I wish they were picking a little bit higher in this draft. They had a lot of chances to be able to make that a possibility, but that isn't the direction that they seem to be going in, um, anytime soon. But I'm gonna go with, and this is kind of a different sort of pick. I made this in the mock, but I'm going with Thomas Sorber here for the
Mm.
Bulls.
Mm.
I think Thomas Sorber's defensive impact is one of the more under discussed elements of any prospect's game. Um, you can look at it both statistically or just from a film's perspective, but the combine measurements as well kind of help illustrate that too. As a guy who's 6'9", 6'10" in shoes, and has a 7'6" wingspan, and is able to be very solid positionally, blocking shots, helping protect the rim, being able to move around at least, maybe not a full-on switchable big, but somebody who can play to the level and be there. I think that in this situation, and especially having the context of the ideas of who they're building around and what they're building with, what he brings to the table as a as a big who can defend in multiple spots and also be able to finish plays, keep an offense humming in terms of DHOs and continuity and those types of things. He's not like a Jokic or anybody, a Şengün or anybody like that, but just being able to make sure role decisions and play off of a Kobe White or somebody like that. I think that's stuff that he can do, and that would be kind of my direction that I would like to go in. I think that you can make a case. The other guy that I was super highly considering here was Essengue. I think I don't know. I think that he's a little bit more of, I have more question marks about just exactly who he is
Hmm.
in the NBA, but I still find his upside to be intriguing. But yeah, I'm going with Sorber here.
I love that pick because Sorber, again, this is all my next episode Sorber is gonna be in
Yeah.
that mix as well. Uh, I think that for the Bulls, especially with Vooch getting up there and just the players that they've invested in a little bit, Kobe, Giddy, Matas, who I love Matas, but just an element of physicality that is kind of missing from that team. And Sorber, who plays as hard as anyone in the draft and marries sort of just brains with activity and physicality and strength. Like it can be sort of a confusing package when you first look at it, especially when you're like, he's 6'9" with a 7'6" wingspan. Does he play full-time five? Like, this is a guy who I just feel as though is going to make a positive impact no matter what his role really is, because he's wired to do so and he's going to have physical advantages. And I think Chicago would love him, and I think he will love like doing whatever he needs to get and stay on the court. I don't want to get too much into what I think his upside could be. I'm going to save that for that episode, but
Yeah.
I think a very worthy pick, a very cool player, and I hopefully my episode is useful for people who are just looking into him. But I'm sure you have a scouting report up on him as well.
Yeah, I definitely know that you will be very thorough on discussing every, bit and piece of what he's got going on. His scouting report will probably be done in the next couple weeks or so. So, but yeah, he's someone that I really would heavily consider in this range, depending on who how things shake out.
Okay, so we are to the Atlanta Hawks now. I've got a couple guys. Let me consult my board here. Look, on the one hand, and this is sort of I think, indicative of sort of an uncomfortable truth about this draft. There are some guard prospects who have not gone yet. You
Mm-hmm.
know, Jace Richardson, Casper Jakucionis, Jeremiah Fears, Igor Demin has his fans. Where some folks are maybe surprised that we haven't picked them or think that we're dumb for not having picked them. But uh, since not all of them are going to be picked, and I doubt one of them is going to go to San Antonio after this, I'll just say that for the moment, like if you are like a point guard, and it seems like you are going to be a point guard in the NBA, it's especially if you're a one and done like all those guys are, it's a long road unless you are a Dylan Harper level, clear, absolutely dominant college player. And I like a lot of those guys. It's just there aren't many teams aching to hand over a lot of initiation reps to point guards that aren't taken in the top five. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you think about, for example, Portland, like they have Scoot Henderson. If you compared Scoot Henderson as a prospect just 2 years ago to the rest of these guys, what conclusion would you come to? It's Chicago, we just went through Chicago's situation, but it is very hard for guards nowadays. And I'm not like in Atlanta, there's like a low key, maybe a galaxy brain thought that you take one of those guys, because maybe Tre's not there for another 5 years. You never know, and you want to get someone some bench reps. I would say that out of all of those guys, at the moment, I think I'm probably highest on Jakucionis, though I really like Fears as well. Uh, but for them, I'm actually going to this is probably going to be another mini zag, mildly surprising. Don't know if I'm going to stick with this opinion either, but for the sake of mentioning him, I'm going to go with Maxime Raynaud from Stanford. And the reason, like, it's not going to be anything super elegant if you know who Maxime Raynaud is, but he is, I don't want to, talk out of turn, but I think, has got to be the best 7-foot shooter in this draft. I'm not really missing anyone when I say that, am I? In terms of like current ability to shoot where you are clearly over 7 feet tall, I would think it would have to be Maxime.
Yeah, it's got to be him. Yeah.
And so like Rafael Barlow, who's been nice enough to come on a couple times, he's been a big fan of Maxime all year. Actually, the first episode I did about this cycle I did with Brian, where we talked about the ACC and we talked about Maxime because he really stuck out among sort of like non-Duke ACC prospects. 20 and 10 basically all year with, and it's not just that he can shoot, it's that he can put the ball on the deck if you close out to him and get to the rim and make a good decision. Is he like the best defensive big in the country? No. If he were, he'd go in the top five. But that shooting ability and stretch ability is an element that Mo Gay notwithstanding towards the end of the year and sort of garbage-ish time, that the Hawks just don't really have. And I think they have built their team in an interesting, understandable direction by trying to insulate Tre defensively along the perimeter as much as possible with Dyson and with Zachary Risache and with Jalen Johnson. But none of those three, in my opinion, are a blue chip shooting prospect. And what you want to do, if you can do it, is find a way to play 5 out. That's what every team wants to do. And even though I like Okongwu and he's been mostly a positive player, his whole career when he's been healthy and gotten extended minutes. And I'm not projecting Maxime to take his starting spot, but you want to be able to go to that look. And that will give them a look and a dynamic with like a true stretch pop center for Tre that he's never really had before, that is going to be extremely difficult to guard. So you want to increase your dynamism offensively. And I don't think that Maxime, like I said, not the best defensive big in the world, but with his mobility even if it's just in a straight line, I don't think that his defense is fatal or anything like that. I think, he's a legit 7-1 and he can move. He's lithe enough. So, like, he can survive, I think, and more than survive. I think he can be a very, very good rotational NBA big. And maybe I'm even selling him short, but for that look that he could give them, he would be my pick at 13.
Yeah, I think that he makes a lot of sense for Atlanta. I hadn't actually thought about that. Um, just in terms of the fact that they haven't had somebody who stretches the floor like that with Trae Young. Like, what would that look like if you have somebody there involved in those actions, and being able to, and especially if a guy like Jalen Johnson is healthy back out there, what that opens up for somebody like him, to be able to explore as a playmaker. Um, I don't know, like, would he be there at 22? Uh, like, do one of
Interesting.
these other teams jump at him like if like let's say Minnesota or just Brooklyn, Miami. Like, I don't know. I think that he could be in that sort of range too, but I definitely like it, just for, you know, being able to give an added element of versatility for that unit. And, they are in an interesting spot. I think you could even play like 4 minutes. You could play him and Okongwu together.
Yeah.
Or him and Jalen Johnson and just kind of run things. But yeah.
I think he'd be fun. I mean, I know that Orlando has a million centers, but if you can, since they're just begging for shooting, I do
Yeah.
think he would have an interesting fit there. So I'm sure Paolo would be happy to have paint that
Hmm.
vacated for the first time in his career. But like that's the thing. You want to make things as easy for your initiators as possible, and there just is really nothing like a five who can really stretch like that. And he is a legit stretch prospect who's not just, with all due respect to Quentin Post, like he's not a Quentin Post who's going to have real trouble moving around the
Yeah.
rest of the time. Not like an elite athlete, but a good one. I think a good, solid one at 7 feet plus.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. So we got 14. That's the last pick in this lottery mock. San Antonio Spurs. Um, got a bunch of guards here. Not gonna be the pick. I
Yep.
just think that just wouldn't make sense based off of the conversation we already had already. It's like you take another one, it's like, okay, what are we doing now? That's
Right.
when we gotta have like what is going on. But I'm gonna take, and this will be, a little bit of a shock to some people, I'm sure, just based off of consensus. But I'm gonna take Noah Penda. Um,
Ooh. I thought you were going to say Essengue.
I,
Which French wing are you going with? But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I wanted to switch it up. I threw some Essengue stuff in there earlier. Um, I guess Essengue would be somewhat ideal here, but I'm sticking with Penda just for the sake of this.
Stick with them. Stick with them.
Um, because he's in a similar range on my board too. But I think Noah Penda's ability uh to guard multiple positions, make plays as a physical guy who's about, 6'7", 6'6", at least from what I saw they measured at that French sort of all-star combine that they had earlier in the year. Um, but being able to do that and bring some value on the defensive end first, and then also what I'm really intrigued by in his game is just being able to um, make plays, driving to the rim in the full court. Certain moments where he has had as a screener and being able to make quick decisions there is another thing that we've kind of hit on a couple times here as a concept. But especially playing alongside guys like Wimby and De'Aaron Fox and those players. I think having somebody like him as a um, as somebody who can guard multiple positions and be able to cover up certain things and just kind of create a strong defensive unit around a guy who's going to win probably the next 10 defensive player of the years as long as he's healthy, um, is something that I would be looking for. So whether that is a Singe and you have confidence in him continuing to grow physically and be able to add enough value offensively, or throw another name out there like a Fleming or a Coward or somebody like that.
Hmm.
I like what Penda brings there. Carter Bryant is the guy who I would who was like at the top of my list for them at 14 if you didn't take him already. But I think that what he brings in terms of that aspect is is you know, super valuable, and I think that he can be a serviceable shooter. I think the steps that he's taken this season will put him in that sort of category for me, and that's why I think that he's worthy of a top 20 pick. So that's why he's the guy here.
Yeah, so I've been watching a lot of Noah recently, actually, this week. I've gone back and forth on him. I think I've left the games that I've watched. I've actually left, I think, more skeptical than I started.
Hmm.
But having said that, like the Spurs, you're like, well, if only he could play with Victor Wembanyama, that would help him out a lot, because of course it would. But with him, he has the brain, a very high effort player who is very sound on defense, can read what an offense is doing very well, and is like a very solid connecting passer. His issue to me is I think he struggles to create separation. And I think when he drives to the rim, his handle can get very loose. And I think because he's another guy, like a different way than Murray-Boyles, but he's another guy who I think should lose some weight. Not that he looks
Hmm.
overweight, but I just don't think he looks very mobile. I like think he just looks a little too thick at like 220 or whatever he is. Uh, and I think like right now, he sort of reminds me of not in every way, but Keyshawn George on the Wizards does not have Noah's sort of connector mind for defensive playmaking, but I think they have similar movement limitations. But Keyshawn has guard skills and like the ability to get to his shot off the dribble that Noah doesn't quite have.
Yeah.
But they're of a similar sort of movement class, and they both have very good underrated hands on defense for deflections and things like that. And I like Keyshawn a lot. And Noah having an open paint to open up his driving lanes and his finishing certainly would be really good for him. It's just, it goes back to the Castle question, to, I guess, a bit about the Harper question is about how much easier would he be making Wemby's life?
Yeah.
And it's a good, like, compared to a guy like Coward, who has, less tape than Noah, but like a lot of hype and a lot, of interesting athletic indicators, great work ethic, promising shooter over the last couple years. I think that would be like a really good debate and question. But what do you think of Coward and his sort of rise, since we won't get to talk about him anymore after this pick?
Yeah. Coward is definitely somebody who it's been interesting to watch the rise to this extent, because for a lot of people he wasn't really on radars in that way just because he didn't play for most of the
Hmm.
season.
Hmm.
I think there was a board that I put out. He was 27th on my board before he went down. So I
Oh,
had to
shout out to you, man. I loved him, and I thought having him like the second round was like, let's go. First
yeah,
round, good on you.
I was pretty bought in at that point. After that, it started to be like, is he gonna stay or go? It's like a weird thing to kind of weigh.
Hmm.
And it seemed like he was pretty strongly gonna, class up and go to a play, or not class up, but go up a level and go to a place like Duke, which was the case. But obviously that's changed a little bit. But I think his tools you just can't teach.
Hmm.
The wingspan. Um, he's not like statistically the most he doesn't have the most gaudy numbers in terms of activity, but like you watch him, you look at where he's at positionally and the way that he affects shots with that length, and I think what he does on that end is very projectable. He's also been super efficient from two, and just being able to convert the opportunities that he is able to get, whether that is attacking a closeout or being in transition. The shot is has been there, And obviously he shot well at the combine too, and that's kind of one of the pieces that allowed his buzz to grow even more. So like I think that at this point he is worthy of considering in the top 20. I think when we start to get like into the top 10 conversation and those types of things, that's where I start to pump the brakes a little bit just because we haven't seen the same sample. Um, but if you are an NBA organization, you get a little bit more eyes and insight into who he is in a workout setting. Obviously, we've got a little bit more of stuff out there in terms of who he is in terms of character and work ethic and those things. And I think those have all been positive by all accounts. But yeah, that's where I'm kind of at on him. At 14, that was one of the like I mentioned him earlier. That was one of the names I would have considered there. And you make a good point about the shooting with Castle and all of them there. I think that I would probably, if we could rewind 10 minutes, that's a great point that I would have made. But Carter Bryant, that was the kind of the Carter Bryant pitch that
I understand.
I skipped in my mind. But yeah.
Well, look, I'm sure OKC would love to pick Cedric Howard at 15. Rich
Yeah.
getting richer. But yeah, I mean those guards are still floating, and I think right now Jeremiah Fears is mocked in the top 10. I think he's in the top 10 in your mock. I think Jakucionis is mocked in the lotto in your mock, if I'm not mistaken. Richardson has fans in the top 10. So, this is a deep draft. It is. It's just when it comes time to make the picks, even in a silly mock that we do on my podcast, you should just sort of, wing size, bigs with ball skill. I think we're just watching the playoffs, and that size, positional size, you just can't replace, So we'll see what happens draft night, but I think we stayed true to a real truism. What a ridiculous thing to say, stay true to it. But positional size really matters is my point.
Yeah.
And we honored that in this mock, if nothing else.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we kind of see that trend in terms of questionable guards falling a little bit or having a wider range in a lot of years. Even Isaiah Collier last year, who I liked quite a bit,
Yeah.
falls all the way to 29. But it's like, at a certain point when you are a smaller guard who has questions as a shooter and isn't a world beater as on the defensive end or in terms of fitting in or playing off ball, then that creates a little bit more of a separation, especially the further you go and the more those teams need somebody who fills a pretty specific need because they have their guys in place in those more contending type of teams. So it should be interesting if somebody like Fears gets past I would say Washington, New Orleans, Brooklyn, maybe Toronto, it will get interesting. A team probably ends up trading up, I would guess, to get him because there'll be somebody looking for an asset, but it could get interesting.
And I think, in our reality, I think Orlando would be thrilled to have sort of their
Yeah.
pick of the litter there. If Hansen Yang does not go 9th overall, then I could see maybe Toronto being interested in something like that. But who knows? There's a lot of time for opinions to change and stocks to rise and drop. It's an exciting time of year. Keandre, thank you so much. If there's any other thoughts, I don't want to be cutting you off, but anything else you wanted to get to about this class and guys you are surprised we did not take?
Not really. I guess the only thing would really be Essengue.
Yeah. Yep.
Just because I think that he is about as wild card as there is. You've got guys like Bilal Koulibaly in previous classes, different kind of rise there between the two of them. But because of his youth, because of the type of production he's displayed this year, sort of the rate of improvement thing with him too, as somebody who was very much a big or a forward in some of the junior club level stuff that I watched previously, kind of starting to expand his game a little bit more to the wing, become a little bit better of a shooter, especially as of late, attack closeouts and be able to show off that stride length and those types of things more frequently. He's somebody who I wouldn't be surprised if Toronto says, "Hey, that's our guy at 9," or
Yeah,
um,
I thought about him there. Yeah, for sure. It's just like,
yeah,
dude, with Scotty, it's just hard, man. You just like, it's hard to take
yeah.
another sort of questionable shooter to put next to him. But I like Noah. I do, and I certainly think again one of these teams. I don't know if Orlando, or I don't know if Orlando would be able to help themselves if Noah were on the board. But I'm sure Minnesota would be thrilled to take another crazy athlete who they don't need to rush onto the floor, who can just sort of be in their program. Uh, he's it's the sort of thing where like a developing team that is already trying to develop other players, that probably means that their shooting environment is very unsettled. And so Noah, you can talk yourself out of Noah or into why Noah would be a clunky fit there. But if you believe in the talent, and I've watched, I just talked about Noah on a Pelicans podcast, In the Know with Shamit Dua and Mason Ginsberg. If you really believe in the talent to the point where like you think that guy is clearly like a top 3 athlete in the draft and he just is on this growth trajectory physically as well as skill wise to where he's going to put on like 20 to 25 pounds of muscle and is going to be unstoppable driving to the hoop, then like yeah, he will go in the lottery for sure. It's he's a really interesting player, and I think I might be sort of frowny faced on him just because uh, of what I saw. Like the games I watched recently were games
Mhm.
where I thought his motor was fine, but like not outstanding. And I think his motor is going to need to be really good
Yeah.
to get minutes early in his career. And I need to see him buy in a little bit more. A lot of talent, a lot of athletic talent, but Bilal's an interesting comparison. Bilal, I think, had more guard skills coming in, and he's gotten like a lot of exposure, and I think has showed a lot of promise, but still, like, he's still not quite crossing sort of average NBA efficiency, and that
Mhm.
really mutes his impact. So, it's Noah goes about it a different way, but a similar challenge ahead for him, I think.
Yeah, I would say Koulibaly, he also just in terms of archetype, he had a little bit more. You could bank on the wing defense being just
Hmm.
something that he could hang his hat on. Noah is a little bit more. It's a little bit more in question, like of who exactly he is. I would say at the next level, but yeah, it does come down to physicality and how much you think that you can help him put on his frame, and you
Hmm.
know, I think in the back of a lot of people's minds, it's like, well, who's the next Giannis? Like, who's the
Yeah.
next guy that we're seeing that we're not fully embracing as that guy? Because like, would you know Giannis is Giannis if he showed up in this next class?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but like you said, the motor isn't always there in that same way. Um, but
Giannis
again,
is
like,
psychotic. You got to remember, like that's
yeah,
another thing is like you have to. Giannis hit everything and then had this crazy growth, in part because he probably was malnourished as a teenager, which
yeah,
Noah's not facing that problem. So like yeah, it's hard to chase that kind of thing.
yeah. But that would be the other guy I would say, and then just like I think Jace is interesting. Um,
Hmm.
I talked to a lot of people who love him still,
Hmm.
even after measuring in pretty short at the combine, but like just the way that he's able to affect games, and how well he was able to scale up and down over the course of the season, still make an impact. He kind of reminds me of Reed Shepherd in some ways.
You bet.
Um, he didn't quite have the same level of impact. He's not the same defensive playmaker, right? Like I think that the way that Reed does things there is how he will eventually overcome some of the size concerns. Um, More once he gets to play a little bit more, but yeah, I don't know. Jace is one of those guys who I could see a team, you know, saying, "Hey, he's our guy in the lottery," or I could see him, going into the 20s. It's just like that's just the nature of it.
Well, I think Chicago at 12. I mean, they have a bunch of guards, but
Yeah.
like The Bulls, first of all, he went to Michigan State. The Bulls like their local players. Fears is also, from Joliet. Jakucionis went to U of I. Wouldn't stun me to see them go with one of those guys, but I think they like taking guys who they know can play. And Jace certainly can play. Like he is an NBA
Hmm.
player. It's just a ceiling question. But there's going to be a team that's just going to be like, can we just bring in this really good shooter who we're not going to
Yeah.
ever have to worry about? And because of McCain, he would have won Rookie of the Year
That
if he'd
too.
been healthy. That's going to help him too. And so he probably will have gone somewhere, that we skipped over for him, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, man. Anything else? Anything else? And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I think that's about the stuff that I had at least on my mind recently. I guess just if you have thoughts on a Will Riley, do
Hmm.
you have he's been one that's been kind of difficult for me to, choose between.
My big question with Will, and I've got to do another, like, I need to go back and watch more Illinois because when I watched them, it was early in the season. It was mostly for Jakucionis.
Hmm.
Um, I need to like make up my mind about Will's sort of athletic projection because that's sort of the like his defensive numbers were not very good. There wasn't a ton of defensive talent up and down that lineup in Illinois, and it's just a matter of do I think even though wings are coveted and like 6'8" with handles, good ISO numbers, that's really good. There's a lot to like there. Do I think that there's sort of an athletic threshold emerging on the wing that he is not going to cross as a starter? I think Will's an NBA player, but is he going to be like sort of a more fungible wing because of where athletically the positions are going and the demands of the position? That's mainly my question. What do you think though?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, and just who he is. Like, how much is he gonna be able to put onto his body to be able to handle certain things? Like, yeah, the
Hmm.
handle is nice and it works occasionally. I think he's pretty physical for his frame, but at the NBA level, that doesn't really matter as much. Um, Guys are bigger, stronger, faster, more length. It's just gonna be tougher to get certain things off and exercise that until some of that other stuff, is a part of his game or a part of who he is. And then the other thing is like, how good of a shooter is he and can he
Right.
become?
Right.
Um, that's been kind of the difficult thing for me, and I think that's been. I understand why maybe a team like I don't know, a Brooklyn in 19 or Washington or
Hmm.
somebody fairly high in the draft might be convinced of him, but at the same time, some of those the defensive activity and that stuff kind of concerns me in a way that maybe he's more of a flyer and more of a long term project. But yeah, he's another guy I think is pretty interesting for that reason.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We haven't mentioned, we're just going to talk about like 30 players. We haven't mentioned Danny Wolf, who I think is interesting. I've
Yeah.
loved Neek Clifford for, 18 months. I think Neek should go right in this range. And I think you could have I
Hmm.
think if uh, Atlanta were not constructed specifically the way they're constructed right now, where like they also have Terrence Mann coming off the bench and like Levert. I don't know if any of those guys are free agents, but like that's a lot of guys that Neek would be competing for minutes with. But if their team was constructed a little bit differently, I might have pulled the trigger on him. But I like him a lot, and I think he can come in and get NBA rotation minutes right away. And though he's a better defender, I mean, he's older than Will Riley, but like a better defender and like a more polished, explosive athlete than Will. Neek's another guy who's like, he's a big guard more than he is a wing in the modern NBA. Even 5 years ago, I'd be like, this guy's a wing all day long. But
Hmm.
now, 6'5", 6'6", 6'8" wingspan, 190 pounds neighborhood, that you run into bigger boys at your position pretty quick. And so I still may end up with Neek in my like lottery if I rank it all out, but that's what is giving me pause with him.
Yeah, I think he's at least in that similar range. He would have been a considered in San Antonio, OKC, Orlando. Those I like him for a lot of those teams. Um, and even if you go further into there, like I think somebody could end up getting a bit of a steal if he was to drop a little bit. But yeah, I think that I was a little more skeptical of him last year. I thought that he was more than draftable, of course, but uh, just because of like the how his career arc had gone to this
Hmm.
point,
Yeah, it took
just
a while for sure.
yeah. But for what he did this year, and like he transformed his game as much as he did last year in terms of the production from his production standpoint, but like what he did as a ball handler and playmaker and um, shooter more consistent this year, I thought was excellent. So
Yeah.
like
When
I
he
have a lot
turned
of
the
confidence in
corner
him.
in like February on, he
Hmm.
was one of the five best players in the country. If you like, in
For
my
sure.
opinion, if you have Flagg, Walter Clayton, I guess Janai were sort of consensus
Yeah.
first teamers. Like from that point on, I thought Neek would belonged in that conversation. I thought there's a case to be made that he was the best player on the floor for most of that game against Maryland. The Maryland won at the very end. I think he faltered a little down the stretch, unfortunately, but for a lot of that game, he was great at doing it, like that sort of all court impact that he has. So some team I think will be very happy with him when they take him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that he's, you know, the more projectable role players, like it's just gonna be something that um is a little bit more appealing than some of these, some of the creation bets that might have a little bit more questions. I think that, they're gonna get jumped by the Neeks, maybe the Cedrics and a Rasheer or somebody like that.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Uh, you have any Yaxel thoughts? Are you a Yaxel fan if he stays in?
Yeah, I'm a pretty big Yaxel fan.
Speaking of all
He's
court impact.
yeah, he's somebody who some of the games that he had at the end of the season were absolutely ridiculous, and it was like it's one of those things where you watching over the course of the game, and it's like you look at the stat sheet, and it's like, well, he has 28, 5, 4, and 3 right now. 30. What do you have? Like one game is like 30, 20, and 5 and
Yeah.
5, something crazy.
No
But like,
turnovers too, yeah.
yeah, like what he's able to do, and he measured out extremely well at the combine
Very
too.
well.
I think
Very
that was
like top 20 well, he
yeah,
measured out very, very well. Yeah.
that was a little bit of a surprise to me too. But yeah, just the way that he's able to impact the game in multiple ways, I think it's gonna come down to the shot in some
Hmm.
capacity.
Hmm.
Um, but he's not a it's not broken. He's not a non-shooter. Like I think that he's at least workable. Maybe it never pans out, but probably does enough else to be within a rotation or at least considered for it. Just dimensions and size wise and feel. But yeah, I think that he's definitely in that first round mix
Yeah.
at the very least.
The thing I like most about him is first of all his endurance. Like to be able to be point forward and the defensive player of the year in your conference takes a lot of engagement and a lot of just physical conditioning. But he plays even with that burden. This is one of the things I wanted to see more out of Murray-Boyles, but like Murray-Boyles is smart enough to where he could, and he's certainly a good enough rebounder, that he should have been like grabbing and going all the
Yeah.
time. And he would have been an absolute beast in transition and like running teams off the floor. And in the games I watch, I just didn't see that frequently enough. I thought he played too slow for his talent level. But Yaxel plays so fast and is always seeking out transition, always pushing the pace, and is a good enough passer to like really weaponize it. He's not just driving, like bull in a china shop. So I
Mhm.
think that the speed of the NBA game will not be too much for him. I think he will fit right in. And that's why ultimately I have questions about the shot as well, but I think he is an NBA player who will stick around. So any one of these teams, after pick, whatever,
Yeah.
pick 14, pick 17, whatever you want to say, like Yaxel's going to get some minutes. He's going to keep getting a shot because he does too much to just like stick on the bench.
Yeah. I'll be I think he's gonna stay in at this point. I would be a little bit more surprised that he didn't, but
Well, if it takes like the Pacers at 23 giving him a promise, then if I'm the Pacers, I'd be like, sure, come on
yeah.
down. Yeah, we'd be happy to have another brainiac on our team. Yeah, I would absolutely do that if I were them.
Yeah. And like we were talking about with the measurables, I think he's at least big enough to play some backup five, like some 5 minutes. I don't know
Maybe.
how well, I don't know how that would go. I guess it would depend on who else you have out there and like what you're running scheme wise. But when you're 6'9" with a 7'4" wingspan, it's at least a potential, possibility. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like him quite a bit. I hope he stays in. Um,
Kind of some superficial similarities to Pascal. Not that I'm actually comparing him to
mm,
Pascal, because Pascal's like a top 4 player from his draft class, but in terms of sort of the route to the NBA, now I
that
kind of
is
want to
true.
see him in Indiana. I think that
Yeah.
would I'd be fun to see him under his wing in that respect. But uh, yeah, a really deep class, man. I know that this is sort of the time of year where everyone thinks that like this is a deep class because, coming out of the combine, a lot of those measurements were very impressive, but a very fun class to talk about. Lots of different ways this could go, you know.
Yeah. Uh, I would I would say I was a little hesitant on the depth of this class, especially as we had guys like Thomas Hogg or how
Oh yeah.
returning. You have Isaiah
Yep.
Evans returning.
Yep.
Um, Even Boogie Fland. Like there's a lot of questions around him, but he's a talented guard. Uh, but as things have kind of played out, like there's a strong number of players in this class, and I think even into like you get to that 40 range, 45. If you could get Sion James at
Hmm.
45 or something, like
I like
that's
Sion.
that's not a it's not in every class. I think it falls off at a certain point, like towards the end. I
Hmm.
think we've seen flatter second rounds, but yeah, I definitely like this class a ton.
What is your next video that people can expect out of you?
We've got Jaeger Dimon coming probably tomorrow, I think.
Also, a
Um,
guy we did not talk about who's, getting a lot of publicity. You're getting a little bit of a push right now, a little bit of a shove. Yeah.
yeah, he's a tough one, man. I it's hard to it's always very easy to make a video or anything content whatever of somebody like you really like or you're confident is gonna pan out. He's not one of those guys for me personally,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I do think that there's at least some intrigue there. And if he shoots it, which at his pro day he was shooting the net off, he becomes a lot more interesting even with the flaws. So
Well,
I
certainly. I mean, if you shoot, yeah,
well,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean if I shoot it, I could play in the NBA.
Well, that makes
But
one of us. If I shoot it, I can't play in the NBA.
well, I
Yeah.
mean if you shoot it well enough, they might give you
Oh,
an
Keandre,
opportunity.
we live in different worlds, my man. No, I would go to like my local Papa Shot and I would ply my craft there. Better use of my time. Yeah, I think, Jaeger, what I think in Big 12 play, his true shooting was like 45, like really rough conference play for him. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think the Giddy experience has like I mean Scotty Barnes is a different, more physical, like more gifted athlete. But like that I think the bloom is off the rose for just oversized playmakers for playmakers' sake. That I think there's an understanding that they are NBA players, but not necessarily that they impact winning And I think Giddey was a better prospect than Jaeger is. So
Yeah.
I think he's sort of the opposite of the McCain, Jace Richardson bump. And I would expect Jace to be taken ahead of him on draft night. And for that and some other reasons. But
Yeah,
yeah.
and I I really like the passing. I think on the surface, he's very talented in that aspect. It's just when you start to talk about um, what that takes and how hard it is to be get those ball handling responsibilities. You look at Amin Thompson, you look at Anthony Black,
Mhm.
Cason Wallace, all guys, and I talk about this, all guys who were better than he was in terms of distributing the ball and being playmakers at the college level or pre-draft, obviously for Amin. They've had difficulties getting those opportunities in the league because of well, Kaysen is a little bit different because he's on a team like that. We don't know what would happen in a different situation. But just speaking of recent, Dyson Daniels, I would throw in this mix too.
Mhm.
It's just so difficult to get those opportunities, and when you don't have the defensive stuff that those guys have, which is special in most of those cases, it just gets harder to project a reliable player at the least. So I think there's a chance that he could pop, but I kind of get into all those things, especially as he was playing tougher competition. And statistically, if you just want to flat out put it statistically, I would I would not I would not be that interested. I'll just keep it like that.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I think, so many people talk about tanking so much of the time that you forget that like 25 on average out of 30 NBA teams every year are trying to make the playoffs.
Hmm.
And for a guy like Jaeger, like if you take him, you're not making the playoffs. If you take him and you play him next year, you are removing yourself from that conversation. So if you don't really have any designs on doing that, or if you don't have designs on playing him, then okay. But like that's what makes him a project. He to me is like I want to be too whatever. It's late. Like to me, he is in terms of winning an unplayable player next year in the NBA. Not to say he won't be playable for a team
Hmm.
that has winning aspirations in 3 or 4 years, but like mostly unplayable next year in that respect. So that's that's how I feel about him.
Yeah, there's a lot of that I'll get into.
Yeah.
Hopefully that does come out tomorrow. But yeah,
All right. Well, this should come out tomorrow or later today if it's, we're getting there in certain time zones. But Keandre, thank you so much. Hoop Intellect is your YouTube page. If you like, I'm sure that at this point of the podcast, everybody knows, but uh, if there was one YouTube page to follow as both an introduction and as sort of a beacon in the draft space, I would start with yours, and I would encourage everyone else to do the same. So keep up the fantastic work, and thank you so much for giving me your time.
yeah, man, I appreciate it anytime.
Thank you all for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Enjoy draft season.